If life feels heavy right now, it may not be because something is dramatically wrong. Sometimes it feels heavy because too many things have been quietly sitting on you for too long. That kind of heaviness is hard to explain. Because from the outside, you may still be doing what needs to be done. You are showing up, answering people, managing things, keeping life moving. And that is what makes it confusing. Because nothing has completely fallen apart. And yet, something in you feels heavier than it should. So if life feels heavy right now, pause. Not to fix it immediately, just to notice it. Because sometimes what you are feeling is not something to solve straight away. It is something to recognize, to acknowledge, to stop talking yourself out of for 5 minutes. I think that is one of the hardest parts. A lot of people do not let themselves admit when something feels heavy unless they can justify it perfectly. They tell themselves, "It is not that serious." Other people have it worse. I should be able to handle this. And maybe you have said some version of that too. But heaviness does not always come from one big event. Very often, it comes from accumulation. Responsibilities. Expectations. Decisions. Things you have had to keep carrying without properly putting them down. That is what makes it subtle. It is not always overwhelming enough to stop everything. But it is heavy enough to affect how everything feels. Simple things take more effort. Replying feels harder. Thinking feels slower. Even small decisions can feel more draining than they should. You may notice it in the way you move through the day. Less ease. Less lightness. Less room inside yourself. And because nothing looks obviously broken, you may not fully understand why. That can make the feeling even harder to trust. Because you are functioning. You are managing. You are still doing what needs to be done. But inside, something feels heavier than it should. And that matters. Because you are not meant to carry everything without pause. I have noticed that people often wait for a collapse before they give themselves permission to acknowledge strain. But heaviness begins much earlier than collapse. It starts in quieter ways. When your mind feels more full than usual. When your patience is thinner. When your energy does not quite return, even after rest. When ordinary things start feeling slightly harder to carry. That is usually the clue. Now here is something important to remember. Feeling heavy does not mean you are failing. It does not mean you are weak. It does not mean you are doing life badly. Very often, it means you have been holding more than your system has had space to process. That line matters, so I want to say it more simply. You have probably been carrying more than you have had room to deal with. And when that happens, the weight does not disappear. It stays in the background, affecting how you think, affecting how you feel, affecting how you move through the day. Sometimes this shows up as tiredness, sometimes irritability, sometimes emotional flatness, sometimes just a quiet sense that everything feels slightly harder. And because it builds gradually, it can start to feel normal. You stop asking what is weighing on you. You just call it life. But naming it matters. Because once something is named, it is no longer just sitting there unconsciously shaping everything. So instead of asking, "Why does everything feel so heavy?" ask something a little more honest. What have I been carrying, without giving myself space to release it? Do not rush that question. The answer may not come as one big revelation. It may come quietly, in a thought, in a feeling, in something you keep brushing past because you think you should be over it by now. Sometimes the answer is not dramatic. It is just the accumulation of too many small things you never gave yourself permission to feel. And once you begin to notice that, something shifts. The weight may not disappear immediately, but it begins to soften. Because you are no longer carrying it unconsciously. You are aware of it now. And awareness creates space. Even a small amount of space can begin to change how things feel. That is why pause matters. Not because pausing fixes everything, but because pausing interrupts the constant carrying. It gives your system one small signal that it does not have to hold everything at once. That matters more than most people realize. So if life feels heavy right now, pause. You do not need to fix everything today. You do not need to carry everything at once. You do not need to become some stronger version of yourself before you are allowed to admit that this feels hard. You can take a moment to breathe, to slow down slightly, to make a little room inside yourself. And from that room, things often begin to feel a little lighter. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to think more clearly. Enough to breathe more fully. Enough to move forward without feeling like you have to drag the whole world with you. Sometimes that is the first real shift. Not solving everything. Just finally admitting, This is heavy, and I do not have to carry it in exactly the same way anymore.